magic is the divine vertical orientation between the divine will and the human will.
What I got excited about this for people is a lot of people have a hard time meditating, but it's not hard to meditate on cards.
The arcana is a symbol that you must learn in order to gain access to higher knowledge. Now, miracles are out in the light and the open. Mysteries are hidden in the shadows.
It's the moment where your ego no longer leads and your spirit does. Welcome to Higher Density Living. I'm Jason Rigby. Today, I'm honored to sit down again with Professor Eric Cunningham, historian, Zen scholar, and author. He's a leading voice in modern Japanese intellectual history and esoteric studies. He brings a rare depth to today's topic, the mystical link between the Gospel of John and the Tarot. This is more than scripture, it's a spiritual blueprint. Let's dive in. Eric, thanks for being on the show today.
Good to see you. Thank you very much for having me back.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I mean, we're ahead of it all, that what's happening with the book that you're writing. And can you kind of go, as much as you could say, I don't know how much you could say, but can you go a little bit into what you're writing and kind of let the audience know the excitement of it and maybe when you first discovered this?
Yeah, in brief, although it's kind of a quirky project, I'm going to show this book. It's called Meditations on the Tarot by an author called Anonymous. He brought it out near the end of his life in about 1970s, and it's Anonymous. We know this is a guy named Valentin Tomberg, who's was a Russian Romanian anthroposophist, who then during World War II he converted to the Roman Catholic Church. And as a result of that, lost some of his friends in the anthroposophical world because they thought he kind of sold out. But I think he would have said that he really was practicing anthroposophy correctly, without some of the quirky additions that the more flaky people in that world, and there's plenty of them, they're everywhere, but we're bringing to the table. So what he did was use the major arcana of the tarot deck, right, which is from the Fool up to the World, not the ones, the pips, not the numbered cards, but the iconic sort of symbolic cards, of which there are 22, 21 plus a Fool, who's card 0. And what's really, he in writing this book, it's called a Journey into Christian Hermeticism. So in his mind, these major arcana cards are categorically a path of Christian initiation. So if you're reading the cards properly, if you're meditating, and this is a book of meditations, 800 pages of meditation on the cards, like 24 pages per chapter on each card. And so he just goes into that. Okay, so so I'm reading this book. I've read it 5 or 6 times, and I really love it. And it's okay. So there's that, and that's one piece of it. The other piece,
It's hard to read too, guys. So
yeah. Well, what this book is for is to help people dope it out. And I've read it so much. I've been sort of condensed and summarized every single chapter so to get people a Reader's Digest version of it.
that's what you're good at. You did with the Chinese Dragon book with Steiner. You went and kind of really explained that, something that would be really hard to explain. You're good at breaking it down.
Thank you. I think I am actually. And if I have any gift, it's certainly not original thinking. I can synthesize things pretty well. And that's the real beauty of this project, is that Tomberg said that the cards were a Christian initiation. And then I read somewhere, it's in Rudolf Steiner's book. It's either in the Apocalypse of John or it's in his book called The Gospel of St. John, probably The Gospel of St. John.
Mm-hmm.
And Steiner declares in there, the Gospel of St. John is a fully fledged, fully mature Christian initiation. Okay, so A equals a Christian initiation. B, if Tomberg says the cards are a Christian initiation, Steiner said the Gospel of John is a Christian initiation. Well, I just said, well, if they're both that, they must have something to do with each other. And voila, I sat down and began reading the Gospel of John from the standpoint of using the cards as a map to it. And it just fell at my feet. And it's so fascinating. And so I think I go out on kind of a limb and say, if the two almost need each other.
Right. Yes.
Christians will be very upset about this, but if you really want to understand the Gospel of St. John, you need those cards in here.
Well, also, I think people need to understand too, what wasn't the Gospel of John the latest book that was written?
Yeah, probably in the 90s AD.
Yes, that's what I heard, the 90s. So you have to think about that from the time that Jesus was crucified and then rose again. And I want to clarify, I want people to understand this before we get into that. It's Eric and I both are Christian mystics. We believe, I mean, I don't want to stand for you, but for me, what Rudolf Steiner talks about, his teachings really changed my life and brought me to a faith that I think is extremely meaningful in my life, you know. And I know you have some Catholicism.
Very much, I echo everything you just said completely.
Yeah, so I don't want people to think that we're atheists talking about this, or that this has spiritual meaning into both of our lives. And so when I got excited about this for people, Eric, is a lot of people have a hard time meditating,
Yes.
but it's not hard to meditate on cards.
No, it's very easy. You know, this blends one of the things we talked about. These images blend right into what Rudolf Steiner calls the path of thinking.
Mhm.
You know, it's not just about figuring stuff out or using your logical mind. That your brain, he calls it an organ of intuition. That thinking itself is an organ of perception. And if you can't sit down and chant a mantra or do this, you can look at the Empress card.
Mhm.
Just use it as a text, and then you start thinking about it and unpacking it. What happens when you follow Steiner's path of thinking is that brand new insights come into your head, and you didn't create them. I mean, this thought forms as part of the matrix will in fact come into your consciousness, and that's what meditation is.
Yes, yes. And I know Valentin Tomberg, the book that you showed, The Meditation on Tarot, emphasizes the union of mysticism, gnosis, and magic. And he does it kind of within a Christian framework. How does your synthesis of Tarot and the Gospel of John reflect this tripartite approach?
In precisely the first 3, outside of the fool is usually the 0 card.
And we're going to talk about that later.
And Tomberg makes it the 21st card. And the Tomberg puts away at the end, and he's got his reasons for it, but I think it belongs at 0. It's the 0 card, absolutely. But if you look at 1, 2, and 3, the magician represents mysticism, the high priestess is Gnosticism, and the empress is sacred magic. And that's how Tomberg unpacks it. So you've got this, and then the fourth piece of it, if you're looking at the path of Christian Hermeticism, you got mysticism, gnosis. Mysticism is the divine spark, and then gnosis is reflected back, like the angels singing, you know, Hosanna, and they're reflecting back. And then the third, yeah,
The magic.
gnosis is the reflection, and then magic is the divine vertical orientation between the divine will and the human will. And then 4 is the philosophy.
Hey.
4 is taking all of this and putting it in the book, the podcast, the work of art, so that all of this very airy-fairy stuff becomes made real in a concrete form.
How do you think it aligns or contrasts with Rudolf Steiner's distinction between the esoteric and the exoteric Christianity?
In several ways. I think even though the Gospel of John is the most mystical book in the entire Bible, it's still exoteric. I mean, fundies read it and mystics read it, and it's an important part of the concrete modalities of the Christian faith.
Mhm.
It is exoteric, but if you read deeply into it, you learn to know something of the indwelling Christ that the other gospels don't get anywhere close to.
Right. Yeah, it's more of a like a universal, like, and then the way that approaches Jesus and the words that Jesus is saying, where the other books kind of reference the Old Testament more, kind of brought this. I don't want to get into Yahweh and all that stuff with, with gods and Elohim, and
Mhm.
but you can kind of see that playing out in the book of John, and Jesus' words were more mystical in the way that he spoke.
Yeah.
You would think he was a new age guy.
No, especially near the end where 'cause, like, the Steiner has an entire devotion dedicated to reading that book, and you read it over the course of a year, and you spend your first 5 weeks meditating only on the prologue of John.
Mhm.
So, and we just finished up Easter was yesterday, but when you read the Gospel of John, it's kind of odd that at the last there's no mention of the Last Supper. I mean, there is, right? But it's not in anything like the same way that he never says, "This is my body, take it and eat it." They're sitting around, and then they get up and leave, and they walk through the garden, and he's like preaching at them the whole time. It's like you said, right?
Mhm.
Age guru telling you bizarre, I mean, stuff that you don't find anywhere in the other gospels. So
Yeah, it's so interesting, yeah.
So back to the esoteric thing, the cards themselves are also have a dual identity in that regard, because they're obviously pictures that you can look at, but they're arcana. And
Mhm.
Helmberg says we have symbols, we have arcana, and we have mysteries, and they're all a little bit different. Now, miracles are out in the light and the open, mysteries are hidden in the shadows, but the arcana is both. And the arcana is a symbol, according to Tomberg, that you must learn in order to gain access to higher knowledge.
Mm.
So that's their esoteric identity, but the exoteric is they're right in front of you. Look at them and you can, play with them, do whatever you want with the cards themselves.
Yeah, how do you balance the hermetic elements of the tarot with the Christocentric focus of anthroposophy?
They seem, well, just because of the way I've been thinking about this for the last 3 or 4 years,
Mhm.
they completely reinforce each other. And if you really begin looking at these cards as the key to the Gospel of John, you can't stop doing that. You can't undo that in your head. I mean, Jesus is the magician. Jesus is the crazy charioteer in chapter 7. The
Mhm.
only time in the Bible where Jesus like loses it and he looks like he's almost insane, that's the megalomaniac card, right? So I mean, so they all completely I mean, I really, and when you think in Steiner fashion, you will acquire insights that no one else has. So I'm not writing this book. I figured it all out. Here, look, I'm a genius. This is the real meaning. Well, all I want to do is make people look at it in this way, and they'll come up with truths that I've never thought of.
Right, right, right. Do you feel like when you're looking at, like, for instance, we'll go with the fool, and I kind of want to maybe we'll park there for a little bit. The fool is described as an agent of the good, and it's linked to amore or to love, with parallels to John the Baptist. Can you kind of go? Let's start there and kind of look at agent of the good, love, and then a description of the fool, and then we'll get into John the Baptist.
That sounds great. So, okay, the other reading I do, and I know you do too, it sort of reinforces this in a lot of ways. We've talked in the past about this guy, Bernardo Castro, right?
Mhm.
You know how he says that consciousness, that what reality is consciousness sort of projected through a dissociative barrier. In other words, where is God? God is right here everywhere. This is what God looks like when God's in operation.
Mhm.
But it doesn't. But it looks like a projection or a symbol or an icon because it's not the fullness. It's projected through the dissociative barrier. So to me, that's the fool. The fool is in the card, he's walking with this little bindle stiff hobo thing, right? And
Mhm.
he's getting ready to plunge off a cliff. So to me, that's the fall through the dissociative barrier, to use Kastrup's language.
Mhm.
And so the Gospel of John begins with, in the beginning was the Logos, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Mhm.
So that is, so in at that moment when the fool plunges off the cliff, that is Logos incarnating, or it's a divine descent from heaven into to a completely alien world that looks like death. He falls off the cliff and dies.
But I mean, like, whenever the fool is often seen as stupid by society,
Yeah, right, right.
but maybe the only one that's truly free. You can see that because the dog is nipping at his heels in the card, and he's not bothered. And in Corinthians, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Let him become a fool that he may become wise." In society, we know, and Steiner talks about this with Harmon, society worships intellect and logic. But real transformation often comes when we surrender the ego and let go of control. So can you kind of get into the because I know, like, with Steiner, he has ego in the Christ impulse.
Yes. So and the ego, well, and according to Steiner, the ego only becomes present in the Earth planetary condition, right? We go from the old Saturn to old Sun to old Moon to Earth. So there's something about these cards that's absolutely insinuated with the earthly process, right? So the cards all depict nature and little dogs barking at the sky. So it's as if the fool goes from a state of egolessness when he is aloft on the cliff, but his plunge into the world, I think he actually changes identity because
Mhm.
the fool becomes John the Baptist. You said we'll talk about that in a minute, but the John the Baptist is the fool.
Mm.
But of course that means you have to think about this. Well, how can John the Baptist be God? Well, because everything's God. And so your thoughts lead to this way, that every single way God manifests is a divine attribute.
We also need to remember that Jesus said that he wasn't worthy to tie the shoes of John the Baptist.
That's exactly right. Which means that even Jesus knows that this is a rather remarkable office holder. And Christian tradition tells us the cousin of Jesus Christ. So his mother was Saint Elizabeth, right? Yeah. Not Anne was the mother of the two of them, but yeah, the mother of Elizabeth. And so there are pockets of Catholic belief that say that John the Baptist himself was born without sin. Not just Mary, not just Jesus, but John the Baptist himself was also a perfect vessel, although he was like crazy person.
Would you say that Jesus was a disciple of John the Baptist because he picked up baptism?
Well, the singer will say that's exactly what it is. And his amazing book called The Temple Legend, that John was an Essene, living in an Essene monastery,
Yes, 100%.
which is why the ritual purification of water was essential to him. The Essenes do laps and they ablutions. So John sort of took that on the road. One of the things about John and Jesus both were concerned that the Essenes were too self-referential. They didn't care about the problems of the world. They wanted their own little perfect society. So it looks like Jesus may have been also a disciple of John's at some point,
Right.
but he jumped ship to begin his own. Jesus jumped ship from the Essenes because his mission had more to do with redemption, loving mercy, healing of the world, rather than making the perfect monastery.
Yes, exactly, 100%. Yeah, I think that parallels that great. I wanted, the Fool's Journey is a starting point for spiritual initiation, and it aligns with, and this is crazy, it aligns with Rudolf Steiner's stages of conscious evolution, such as the transition from old Saturn to the present. Do you think that that's the Fool's Journey is the start for spiritual initiation?
Yeah, I do. And and that's not a radical thing to believe in, because you can find most Christians will, even if they don't believe in mysticism at all, they'll grudgingly accept that premise.
Right.
But so in that sense, it also, in a fractal manner, echoes the creation of the entire cosmos. Good, because we go back to the Kabbalah, right? There's the Ein, the void, and then the Ein Sof, which is the boundless potential for conscious, and then Ein Sof R, which is the limitless light. It's all in the prologue of John. So you can't understand that unless John is the fool, and that the John itself is the fool's journey. The Gospel of John is the fool's journey.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And the Fool is a paradox. He symbolizes both spiritual courage and potential disaster that you talked about. So he's either a holy wanderer walking in divine freedom or a reckless idiot walking off a cliff. And so it's this love or selfishness that makes the difference. And I think the book of John, what you just said, is this shift from intellectual knowing to knowing by love. And that's what the ego doesn't understand. It transcends the ego. So the fool is not a scholar or a priest. He's not climbing any type of hierarchy. He's transcending it by relinquishing control and trusting the divine.
That's exactly it. And so John doesn't look like much of a loving guy. He looks like kind of a bastard, right? He's condemning the people that he's actually baptizing. But our romantic notion of love doesn't jibe with that. But that is love. His complete renunciation. Like, he lives in a desert. He has no worldly goods. He has no worldly affections. That is as much a love as the cross.
But he had a pull because Eric, the scripture said that he had the whole town come out.
Yeah.
And how many people lived in Jerusalem at the time?
It's the capital of a Roman province.
It says the whole town came out and he baptized majority of them.
And the whole time badmouthing the Pharisees and the Sadducees. But he gets his licks in on them, as Jesus does.
Right.
So in that sense, they do look like kindred blood brothers in that sense. But yeah, but this is the ground zero of a truly loving hero's journey.
Yes, and that's the amor, the Latin for love. That's the hidden esoteric name of the fool. So pure love is irrational to the ego, but we know it's the key to higher consciousness. Rosicrucians have the heart with and we see that in Catholicism too. What do you make of the fool is amore?
Well, a lot of it, I guess, would come out of what Tomberg has to say about him. And I know you've just read this chapter, he talks about, Theodor Eulenspiegel, and he talks about Don Juan.
Yes, that was cool.
So he takes a lot of literary tropes and says these are the perfect lovers. And they're all reckless. They're all, for the sake of some higher good, they're completely self-sacrificing, but they can also be an irritation to the local population.
Well, Don Juan's a perfect fool.
Yes. Yeah, he actually is. He actually is.
Do you think the fool teaches you to surrender your plans, your pride, and your fear? And no matter how foolish it does look, to just fucking walk in love?
Walk it, and if you really have the courage to do that, you can't ever go wrong.
Mhm.
It can take away everything you've got. I mean, but people are finding out this right now. People are losing
Right.
everything they got, and they're freaking out about it. It would be such an easy shift to go, "I'm not gonna freak out about this."
Right.
You surrender everything. John surrendered everything. Jesus surrendered everything. And what did James, in the again, this sounds like a, Bible geeking out. I don't mean to do that either, but
No, that's great. I love it.
the letter of James when he goes, this man just sits amid his projects and plans, and he's
Mhm.
dithering away his life. Where the real money, the real gold is pure love, and it's not Hallmark cards love. It's Easter love. It's a brutal kind of it's a renunciate. It's walking off the cliff.
Mhm.
With your dog yapping at your heels.
Yes, yeah. And traditionally, the fool is outside the tarot sequence, and you shared that it's outnumbered. But I mean, it's unnumbered, it's wild, and it's free. But what's interesting is it comes right after judgment and before the world.
In
So, do you think this symbolizes the transition from resurrection to total integration?
See, that's a wonderful way of looking at it. I mean, and that's another barrier. That's a Castrupian dissociative barrier.
Right.
And one of the cool things about the cards when you're breaking down into packs of 7, you always see a major metaphysical shift from 7 to 8, and then when you go from 13 to 14, and then all the way up to the end. And then the Fool is, like you say, a wild card stuck in there. So there's interesting reason to put it right there near the end.
Yes.
I have to put it at the beginning because of the Gospel of John. Because
Right.
John the Baptist is the fool, and there's no place in the gospel where the fool gets plugged in between the resurrection and
Mhm. Well, we even know because you brought up Saint Elizabeth. We even know that Jesus said, like, when in the womb, when John the Baptist, because he was John, it was John the Baptist first, then Jesus. But didn't John the Baptist like leap in the womb, or
wait,
where Jesus?
shows up, right? It's in this is the second mystery of the Rosary, the second joyful mystery. Mary goes to visit her kinswoman out in the field where she lives. Yeah, I mean, the church has always used this as a very vivid argument against abortion, for what it's worth. But
Right.
John the Baptist was jumping and kicking when the mother of Jesus appeared. I mean, this is a very deep cosmic connection between these two boys. That's
You could see it carried out. I mean, it went to the point to where even the death of John the Baptist and then Jesus, we can see what was it the shortest? No, that was Lazarus, was it? Where he said Jesus wept in John 11:35.
oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. But I mean, and you got to imagine. I would imagine that Jesus would have been pretty sorrowful when John, if they had that spiritual connection
Well, in the other
with
gospel,
Herod.
I think it might be Luke or something. And he goes, "No, it wasn't just a prophet that they killed." And Jesus really reflected on this, like, boy, that was really bad.
Yeah, and it was all Armon. It was all like pure Herod's whole thing was lust with this woman that set him up with this dancing of the seven veils. Like I said, like you said, we don't want to geek out too much in the Bible, but I do want people to understand the fool. It's the representation. It's the moment where your ego no longer leads and your spirit does. And that's why meditating on it. And I believe would you say that your book that's coming out is a spiritual map?
I'm calling it a manual for initiation,
Mm.
and I'm dead serious. I think,
Yes.
if a person, kind of hokey, but I mean, if you've got if you've read Tomberg and you got him in hand and you got
Mhm.
survival and you got the cards, that's all. I mean, this is really a bold statement, but that's all you need to truly, in fact, update your consciousness.
Yeah, it's not, I think it would be, you would want something that's out there, that's known, that's like you said, hitting into the muse is able to hit the matrix. The fool is the soul at the edge of transcendence, letting go of all certainties, ego goals, worldly attachments.
Mm.
And that's where John the Baptist even talked about that. He's eating locusts, he's out in the desert, he has no worldly attachments at all. And I like it because it invites you to move beyond the mere intellect, which we can get so caught up in. And I'm going to use some key words here that I was reading in that book is it steps into divine madness. And I like the word madness because, we don't want to look at the shadow in our spiritual initiation. We don't like that dark side, the yin and the yang, the dark side of things, but it is kind of a divine madness going through this.
It's the madness that reveals the folly of the logical world, right?
Yes.
So, and you said something to just build on something you said a minute ago. When you, I'm not getting ahead of myself or anything, but in the movement in the first chapter. So I think the prologue is the tiny itty bitty prologue,
Yeah.
Fool card. Chapter 1 is Jesus the magician. But you notice that he said, "Oh, here comes the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And this is the first time Jesus appears in and John is already loses two of his top disciples, just turn and go straight with Jesus, and it doesn't even bother him, John.
Mhm.
There's no competition between who's got the bigger, group of believers. It's like John is completely ready to relinquish even that, which is most important to him, which is his ministry.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's important. John chapter 1, and I know verses 1 to 18, that's kind of the tarot card, the fool. What you're saying there. How might this practice, maybe you can walk us through this, but how might this practice parallel anthroposophical exercise, like the reverse culture, or, a lot of people have used Steiner's path of inner development?
Yeah, I didn't even think about that in specific terms until we chat and you did the questions that we raised a couple of,
Mhm.
but I think, and I just because of your question, I began thinking in reverse from the last chapter of John all the way up to the beginning.
Mhm.
Actually, in the first chapter, in the prologue, where the prologue makes so many fast-moving identities, where the whole history of the world is encapsulated. If you can look at the book of Genesis, I know you've gone some deep dives in Genesis here lately, but in beginning, when the Lord moved, blah blah blah, he said, "Let there be light." Grant
Mhm.
Ron tightens the screw a little bit. No, in the beginning was the Word.
Yes, the logos. Yeah.
You put those together that the logos precedes the light. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Then or d it and the logos, well, what through him nothing everything came to be, without him nothing came to be. What came
Mhm.
through him was life.
Mhm.
Life was the light of the world. So it already circles back on Genesis.
Mhm.
And Genesis is a coded map to the creation of the planets in the cosmos. So you can really, I mean, to actually imagine
Mhm.
that the Fool card and John's ministry is the planet Earth coming out of the primordial soup, and they're the one and the same thing fractally. I mean, this is blows your mind. I mean, because every single thing is roped into that moment.
So you feel like, and I don't know if you studied the law of one or raw teachings or anything like that, that they have a whole book 4 of tarot, but with these channels, some people think it's bullshit or whatever, but one of the things that they talk about is going from third density to fourth density, and what that looks like. Is that what you're talking about? Is this correct me, I may be wrong here, Eric, so I want you to correct me, but is this the coming out of, what we've been to this, higher, like somebody would say, higher conscious level that the earth is experiencing?
The short answer is yeah. Somebody that I really admire told me to get my hands on the law of one, and I've yet to do so. But I know how important that is. What I think down the road, this book gets to come out, and then the next piece of this is the apocalypse of John.
Mhm.
As I understand it, and this comes from Steiner and a lot of my own sort of thinking about this. The fourth dimension is itself a bridge. The fourth dimension is like a zone of pure conflict. It's
Mhm.
fifth dimensional thing that resolves it all. So as the third dimensional world begins to reveal its cracks, and the physicists tell us that all the third dimension is really just impressed upon a two-dimensional surface.
Yes.
So then when it explodes, it'll already start losing its integrity. The fourth dimension will carry you to a higher place. And I think that's really the message of Christ crucifix.
Mhm.
I mean, Easter makes a nice end of a lovely, beautiful story, but it's not the end of anything. It's the beginning.
Mhm.
So the last chapter of the apocalypse, written by the same guy, apparently, is a new heaven and a new earth.
Right,
But
right.
the fifth dimensional moment.
Yeah, the spiritual initiation of the resurrection.
Yeah, no, the alchemical Rosicrucian alchemical, marriage of the spirit.
Mhm.
When we all become one with Christ and we're like we're Snow White waiting for the kiss from our beloved to come back into real life.
Yeah, and the Bible talks about that too, like us being the bridegroom.
Yes. There's so much in there. And I think you don't need to figure this out. You need to think about it.
Mhm.
And that's enough because there's no resolution in this dimension. This is a dimension of conflict.
Yeah, do you think that blending, uh tarot cards, with Christian theology. I know, like, there's some people that are listening to this. They're like, whoa, 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 we're way outside of traditional Christian circles here.
Yeah.
How do you respond to critics who might see this as incompatible with, typical Western Orthodox beliefs?
Well, I happen to know the bishop of my city, but the bishop of Spokane, who is a splendid person. I mean, in addition to being a really good bishop for his flock. In a conversation I had at the time I met him, he made some random crack about one of the professors he knew that was into tarot cards, and isn't that a joke? And so at that point, say, "Oh no, you're wrong, Your Excellency," right? This is just one of the things you have to sit with. And I know this sounds kind of vain, but I just have read more about this.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes.
I mean, to the Christians who I know and deeply respect, who think this is, reckless, bordering on dangerous, all I can say is, you haven't thought about this for 25 years, and I have.
Right. Well, I think it's also like how why do people what's this thing with, because I can remember, and you probably do too. Can you remember, like, in the old days, playing cards? I'm talking like just the regular playing cards were demonic, and like Elvis moving his hips and all these things. I think it's kind of these puritanical, something's not understood, then let's crucify it.
Yeah, well, America in its early days was kind of a theocracy of Puritan ministers, and
Mhm.
you couldn't play cards in Massachusetts, at all,
Mhm.
you know. And so I think that we know the links between the tarot and the modern deck of playing cards is just it's self-evident.
Do you think in your research on particular areas where you see like this synthesis between the Torah and the Gospel of John and anthropological insights, how might this, do you think, address contemporary issues like ecological spirituality, development of higher senses, the role of spiritual practice and fostering community? What does that look like for you, for somebody that's in the here and now, the contemporary side of things?
I think they have vivid answers to all of that stuff, especially card number 8, which is it's called strength. Well,
Mhm.
Tomberg has a different numbering. Sometimes it's justice, sometimes it's strength. But in the standard tarot deck, it's a woman and she's holding open a lion's jaws. So according to Tomberg, this woman in the card is the symbol of the pre-fallen world. So her virginity isn't sexual abstinence. Her virginity is the complete purity
Mhm.
of Eden, of the world prior to its fall. And she's just completely at peace with this lion who would otherwise be devouring her. So there's multi-layered ecological lessons in there. So I really think, it's not that my book's going to change the world. It could, who knows? But this one can, and I think mine will help people read it. So I think it'll bring Christians. Mainstream Christianity is a wreck. Um,
Yes.
and this will open up. It'd be fun to have, our local bishop say, "Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about this." And yeah, the Empress is just sitting in this beautiful natural environment. The 4 cards are the 4 elements of nature. And so there's these cards and this book and the Gospel of John will necessarily trigger a reintegration in natural worlds.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I want to touch base on this with our audience that's Christians that are listening to this, kind of feeling skeptic. I always ask Christians, how Christian are you? When's the last time you read the Bible? And I'm not talking from a logical standpoint, but with a heart of love, open, ready to hear the words that are coming from the scriptures. When's the last time you've had contemplative prayer? When's the last time you've meditated on Christ and what he's done for you? When's the last time if you're Catholic, when's the last time you've done, and when you really talk to people, it's just a name that they throw out. It's a brand that they have that's been marketed by this pop culture Christianity with these big mega churches and charismatic political pastors. And for me, that's not true Christianity.
No, but we run the danger of falling prey to the sin of pride or whatever, because we're standing in judgment. I don't know what's on anybody else's heart,
Right, of course. Right, right.
right? And but that's not what you're saying. It's just obvious that if European Christianity is kind of a wasteland. American
Mhm.
Christianity just looks like a marketing scheme.
Yes, yes, yes.
A lot of slogans, a lot of big boxes, a lot of, and it's can be very tedious. I think it would be so nice to have something that excites the imagination.
Mhm.
And I think really does bring about the love you're talking about. The first question you ask is, what do I even know about this? And St. Ignatius of Loyola in the spiritual exercises, the whole first week is an encounter with your own sinfulness, right? And he uses that word, not what challenges are am I facing, but imagining that the biggest problem with the world is me.
Mhm.
How do I embrace that? And what means might I have of improving that situation?
Yeah, and why would you not think that there are many means of getting to that level of higher consciousness where you can allow God, the universe, however you want to say it, speak to you. So this is just another avenue, another approach that I think for a Western audience, instead of, because I mean, you're an expert in Eastern mysticism and understand that, but our Western brain can do you feel like the tarot is kind of a way that, I know Chinese have cards and stuff like that, but I mean everybody does, but what do you think when it comes to our Western brains embracing something like this? Do you think it makes it easier for us?
Way easier. Yeah, it makes it possible. If not easy, it certainly makes it possible. And I mean, you've heard a lot of Steiner. That Steiner really thought that European people needed to follow a Western path. Well, you don't even know what it is anymore. So to recover the Western path, we're just as weird and airy fairy as the Japanese and the Chinese are. I mean, if you really go deep into Christian mysticism or the Kabbalah, or some various forms of Islamic spirituality, I mean, it says out there, all the kids in the 1960s didn't all have to become Taoists. They could,
Right.
right? And I think Steiner said you can just stay home and develop your own civilization
Right.
spirituality. You'll find it just as rich.
Mhm. What do you think with this skeptics of tarot? And I know people automatically try to associate DOA with Aleister Crowley and all that. So Crowley made his own cards. What do you like? And it's magic, satanic. You're opening demonic forces to you. What do you say to all that?
There's nothing more demonic than your neighborhood bank. That's the first thing I say. And it's untrue. And no one seems to have a problem with that.
Mhm.
So then the next thing in this book, I mean, Tomberg's book points out the difference between sacred magic, personal magic. I mean, we just turn like you said before, the puritanical mind will turn what it doesn't understand into a caricature, whereas the
Mhm.
self, and then shoot it down at long range. Whereas magic, I mean, Catholics believe that every Sunday there's a priest turning a wafer into the body of Christ.
Yeah, transubstantiation. Yeah.
Right, and the angels and Jesus are attending that mass and flying down onto the altar. That's as magic as that you can get.
Yeah, I know. I love that.
It's divine magic, and Talberg says, well, if you use magic as an unauthorized attempt to control nature, that's bad news. But magic in which the human will and the divine will is
Mhm.
united, and then you invoke Christ as the author, the true
Right.
author of magic, a la the magician card, you can't go wrong.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. You're people don't realize this, but just as the Martins or the Rosicrucians or anybody, when you go to mass, you're doing the same spiritual initiation.
Yes, you are, but it's been so bourgeoisified that it
Mhm.
looks like what you do before you come home and watch a football game.
Right, right.
It's really, and actually I had a Muslim student who told me this Arab dude is just really one of my favorite students I've ever had, and he kind of echoed what you'll often hear. If we really believed that
Mhm.
on Sunday we're gonna go receive Jesus into our body, because we would be going up there on our hands and knees.
Mhm. Yes.
So you guys really believe this? Then why are you just sauntering up to the And then he said he made a good point. It gets back to your point. How devout are you?
Yes, yeah, yeah. And there I think that tension should always be there. John 1:5 states that, and you mentioned this, as the light shines in the darkness,
Yeah.
and the darkness does not overcome it. When we could get into all these different mystical, this is the story, here's journey, whatever you want to get into it. But I think this is where light comes in to this darkness, the darkness that's over the Western world that you see now. And I think this is light. This is bringing something in that allows people an easy path to. I don't want to say the word easy, but it's you can get the Book of John, you could get a deck of tarot, and you could start meditating.
Yeah, there's no downside to it.
Mm-mm.
And you look what you're doing with your whole career now is a light bearing exercise. So like you said a few minutes ago, this more and more and more is happening. If you took the yin yang symbol, the moving dai chi thing, right? There's a little speck of light inside the darkness.
Mhm.
It cannot be eradicated.
Do you think I want to get back to the fool and us focus on this for the last part of the book of John here, with John chapter 1, but it said the word became flesh and dwelt among us, where the fool represents the descent into matter and the potential for spiritual transformation. What do you think this suggests about the relationship between the divine and the human in spiritual evolution? The word became flesh and dwelt among us.
I think it gets to two things that are important. One from Carl Jung, interestingly, and also from Steiner's. There've been the planetary evolutions inside Earth. You've got a fractal reproduction of, all the way through these various planetary epochs where you have Atlantis, right? And then the Lemuria Polaris, Atlantis, and that Atlantean depth. We're at the absolute bottom of a path that it was absolutely necessary. From that standpoint, Steiner says it was completely necessary for the divine Christ to incarnate as a person. The word had to become flesh, or we would all already be on a slag heap,
Mhm.
pure matter. So it took God to take on flesh and the sins of humanity in order to turn that energy around. And then Jung said something so cool. And I only knew this, I don't read a lot of Carl Jung, but Bernardo Castro brought my attention to this through one of his podcasts. And the book of Job sort of represents the end point of the God Yahweh, where
Yes.
when you look at Job talking to God, and Job sounds infinitely more rational. Like, I don't understand why I'm suffering like this. You're making a bet with the devil, and I'm suffering miserably. And at the end, this all gets restored. But God's logic is horrible.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I'm God, and what are you? You're just like an ant. Were you there when I created the? Were you? And so there's some. It's almost like in the councils of heaven, they all sat down and said, That's not a good answer anymore."
Yes. Yeah. 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 There was a whole. I don't think people realize this. I don't want to get too far off on this, but there was a whole occultic huge movement all across the known world of the God Yahweh. And so I would encourage people just to look that up, because the Old Testament's a lot can become a lot different. And I think it opens things up in a more, like we were talking about people using psychedelics, prophets and stuff, and then multiple plural gods, Elohim, and then angels. I mean, the Old Testament becomes this crazy book, really, when you begin to dissect the Hebrew words.
And look at how many non-Jewish, non-Christian cultures, as you say, had a devotion to Yahweh in a certain get a certain
Mhm,
function as a god that Steiner
mhm.
taught. It's like a moon god,
Yes.
commanding troops from the moon to save the earth in a noble and heroic fashion. But that doesn't mean he's God the Father.
Yeah, 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 exactly. And I think that explains a lot. Like, because people always, they're like, I can't believe the Old Testament. There's slavery, there's genocide, there's all these things, and I always share that belief or point in the Old Testament because it explains a lot. Because it's almost like, I know there's 66 books, but it's almost like, what the hell is the Old Testament and the New Testament? They're like two different things. Jesus is talking about the Father is somebody totally different than the people I see in the Old Testament. That
That's
makes
right.
sense.
And so, like Jung said, there had to be an incarnation.
Mhm.
The only way God, the only way the divinity could understand the human condition, which is weird because it argues against the omniscience of God, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
God did this, whoever was running planet Earth had to call upon a higher power, which is Christ, and then to create this vertical orientation between the planet and the heavens.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, that's so good. I know you talked earlier on John chapter 1, 19 to 34. John the Baptist testifies that Jesus is the Lamb of God and the Son of God. The fool, as we continue on the fool card for the next few minutes that we have, the fool is seen as a figure who recognizes and points towards higher truths.
Yes.
How do you think the act of testimony and recognition in both those narratives reflect the process of awakening to spiritual realities? And what role does it play in the development of consciousness? Whether it's Steiner's teachings or what you're seeing in the book of John here.
I think it does in that card and the card called the High Empress.
Mhm.
High priestess, sorry, the high priestess. In both of them, you see both a very human reaction to an environment. Like John is a baptizer, and there's this guy coming, there's the Lamb of God. And the other one, and water plays a huge role, both of them. In chapter
Yes.
two, out of nowhere, Mary shows up and they have the first wedding attain of miracle.
Mhm.
That's not even part of the narrative, but it is part of it with the high priestess. So you see, to answer your question, there's an exoteric reaction to the world. There's a sequence of events going on, and there's a
Mhm.
purely Gnostic appreciation of something much, much deeper. going on. Like John knows who Jesus is, even though he pretends.
Yeah, and we water, it's that spiritual initiation, it's the birthing, it's that feminine side of things. We know in Genesis 1, the spirit of God moved upon the waters. So that's a huge theme when it comes to the initial steps on the path of spiritual development.
Yes, it certainly is.
When you see the first disciples, John 1:35-51, we see the first disciples being called to follow Jesus. And some are like, hey, here's the Messiah, I'm all in. Others are kind of still, they're following him maybe for political reasons or whatever it may be, because they think he's going to overthrow, obviously, two bad systems that they were oppressed under. The Fool of the Terror is often interpreted as the seeker who embarks on a journey of discovery. How does the theme of calling and following in the gospel resonate with the Fool's journey?
It doesn't as much as it resonates with the magician.
Okay, explain that.
So the magician, okay, so there's already a break when the two disciples leave and they follow Jesus. And he goes, "Well, you know this whole thing called the Lila, right? Where Alan Watts likes to say that God's playing hide and seek with himself. The first words that these disciples say, where are you? Where are you? Where are you hiding? Or where are you staying?" And Jesus says, "Follow me." And so Jesus becomes this magician leader guy who's just giving them cryptic answers to simple questions. And then he's giving everybody different names. I mean, he's practicing magic right there. And then with Nathaniel is the most interesting story because he's the one who's sitting under the fig tree, like the Buddha. And then Jesus says, "Oh, here comes a true Israelite. How'd you know? I saw you sitting under the tree." But that gets all the way back to the Mithraic mysteries, where you go from a raven to warrior, right? And then there are these ranks of initiates. If you were a true Persian or a true Israelite, or that meant you had a really, really high rank. So what's being suggested there is that Nathaniel was already an initiate of some kind. So Jesus takes him in, and so there's so much hidden meaning in that. So I think that's chapter one. Jesus is the pure magician.
I love that. And, considering the entire structure of John chapter 1, from the cosmic beginnings with Logos, verses 1-18, John's testimony, verses 19-34, and then now this personal calling of disciples, 35-51. Do you think this progression mirrors the Fool's journey into role where the Fool moves from innocence and potential to recognition and commitment through all these various stages?
Yes, and it's the directly from the mystical, which is Jesus playing the magician, and then it comes really home to roost when Mary shows up as the high priestess to command her own son to change water into wine.
Mm.
So I mean, it's really profound. So what kicks it off is pure love, the amor, which is John the Baptist setting the stage for how Logos incarnates into this world. It's really
Yeah, that's amazing. If you wanted to wrap this hour up, Eric, because I know we're going to do many of these. We were talking about it off air. I want to encourage people. There's two things that you could do. You could grab a deck. You can grab the book of John. Go buy, if you don't have a Bible, go buy a Bible. Do you like a certain translation? Is there something? I always encourage people, for me, I do this with journaling too, is to buy a Bible that really resonates with you. And that's kind of, if you can afford it, if you make $12,000 a year, buy a dollar Bible. If you make $120,000 a year, buy $120 Bible. Buy something that you can treasure and keep, and it becomes meaningful to you. Do you like certain translations, or do you like certain tarot cards? Like, I kind of want to be practical for people before our next episode.
the book I'm working on is based on the Waite Rider deck with these beautiful images made by Pamela Coleman Smith over about 120 years ago or so. And the Bible, the only Bible I've used growing up in the Catholic Church, it's the new, I've got about a couple dozen Bibles of various stripes, but the New American Bible, and this is the Catholic version, which has the books of the Apocrypha in it. But like I've consulted Greek New Testaments, I'm every time there's something, even I've read through the entire Greek New Testament just to make sure that
Right.
it's like I did with the Lucifer verses. I went through the entire Chinese of the Tao Te Ching just so I didn't put my own overlay onto it. Now, there's a lot of overlay there's a huge the interpretive soup is massive, but I don't want to. Some of the translations just aren't very good, and some of the translations contradict each other. So I use the Greek whenever in doubt about what was being said.
Yeah, and I think it's important too. You have this Orthodox Christian flavor, conservative, almost Baptistic or whatever you want to say, flavor on some of these newer translations that have these ultra conservative scholars. So I think that's a great one. I know the ones that are trying to, and people can look this up, that are really trying to hold to, I think it's a Septuagint, right? Which is the Greek, like literal. I know the NASB is one that does that. The NIVs, everybody knows about that one. The NSRV, which is a Catholic Bible, I think. So, those are, I read the King James. It's funny. I don't know why. It's like a rhyme or a poem. It has like a cadence to it. And so that's what I read when I was a kid. So I'm used to that. But, that has the Apocrypha in it, the ones you do. I know, what was it? The Council of Nicene kicked all that shit out.
I see.
All these men.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's funny is like the Catholic Church says, well, our Bible is the only true one because we didn't get rid of the Apocrypha. They just got 300 other books in the year 415. So it is, yeah. I mean, there's a whole lot and I've got my Dead Sea Scrolls and I got the Nag Hammadi scriptures. There's a lot of stuff there that will reinforce a scriptural understanding of Christendom.
Yes, yeah. But I would encourage people to just grab it. You can read on free online, the Book of John. But before we get to the next episode, if people would do those two things, I think it would start the process of the spiritual initiation, if that makes sense.
Well, if you really want to start some conversations, walk around town with the tarot deck and the King James Bible. You'll make a lot of friends.
That's on my coffee table right now. That's hilarious. Well, Eric, it's been amazing. Appreciate this as always. We're going to get into, what were you talking about before? Like we're going to do, what is it, 3 episodes with the different, and then the patterns. Can you kind of give us a preview of what you're looking at, the 6 or 7 cards more we're going to do per episode?
I'm very grateful that you want to indulge this. But yes,
100%.
that's right. If we looked at the full kind of today, the next group will be from 1 to 7, which is the Chariot, and then from 8 up through 13, and then the very last. Because each of these groupings of 7 represent a major shift in consciousness between the cards themselves.
Yeah, and that's what's the cool part is these Major Arcana cards, as you begin to meditate on them and study them, and we go through the Book of John, you're going to see this, you're going to see an evolution inside your spirituality that I think is going to be exciting to see in this community.
I pledge it. You will. You absolutely will.
Yeah, it's super cool. Well, thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. Everybody go in the show notes below. We have links to Eric's books, very scholarly books that he has there. Some of them I haven't read yet. Do you have the one on psychedelics? I don't think I've read that one.
It's called Hallucinating the End of History. It was my dissertation, and it's pretty academic. I think it's good, and you will be rewarded if you plug your way through it. But it's an academic book.
Yeah, so but I encourage, we'll put the one because it was a Daddy Chang, right? That
Yeah.
we'll make sure we put that one. And that has a great section in it explaining Rudolf Steiner. If you get kind of confused with his, I think that helps the common man with that. So thank you, Eric. Appreciate you being on HDL.
You too, Jason. Thank you so much. You take care.